Hello and what is up, YouTube? My name is G3Iron, and today we are taking a look at the first week of Metamorph 3.9's expansion with, of course, accompanying Atlas of the Conquerors meta overview. So what we'll take a look at today is a couple of different Ascendancy comparisons, along with some comparisons of popular skills, popular passive choices on the tree, as well as some different items that are seeing a lot of play early on in Metamorph 3.9. Of course, we will compare both softcore and hardcore trade leagues for Metamorph, as we have done in the past. We've got data as well to give us a comparative overview, kind of a look back or a review, as it were, of the last year of Path of Exile and how choices have been changed with the various balance notes and patches and new expansions and new leagues that have come in 2019. Those of you who are new to the channel, of course, you can like, subscribe, and ding the bell for more notifications about videos and discussions just like this one. And of course, if you're a veteran of the channel, welcome back. And you already know there are timestamps placed above my slightly balding forehead for your convenience to jump around and take a look at different points of the video at your convenience. Of course, all of the various statistics and more information are down below in the video description. Lastly, big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters. Thank you so much for backing the channel. So as we jump right in for our very first and most popular graph, we're taking a look at popular Ascendancy choices in Metamorph League. Now, when you first look at this, you might be confused if you've never seen what this thing looks like. The breakdown is as such. Blue lines, if you see blue lines, these blue lines are comparisons between Softcore Metamorph League in yellow or along the top line of this particular graphic, and Hardcore Metamorph League, which is along the bottom line of this graphic. Blue lines means there are no changes in their place, in their position of popularity. There might be changes in their percentages of being played, but there's no change in terms of their rank overall between softcore to hardcore league. A yellow line means that it's more popular in softcore than in hardcore as an Ascendancy choice, and red lines means it's more popular in hardcore rather than in softcore, conversely. So coming in at the top spot in softcore Metamorph, we've got the Saboteur coming in all the way above 20%. The Necromancer comes in at 20%, and then the Trickster comes in at 8%. So the meta is pretty much set between Sabo and Necro, one of them being very strong for bossing. Well, that's really just a joke. Both of them are very, very strong for bossing. A whole bunch of folks who were worried about the zombie nerfs, as it were, through the patch notes. The reality is that zombies are just fine. A lot of players are still playing with them, of course, in both hardcore and in softcore. In hardcore, Necromancer is actually even more popular. It's taking the top spot because there's lots of different ways you can play the Necromancer Ascendancy, and minions are doing just fine. And Ascendancies in 3.9, remember, didn't receive major reworks. This is the first time, I believe, since 3.1 and 3.2, since that big patch cycle, that we have actually had an Ascendancy go unreworked during a patch. So this is relatively consistent with what we might have expected with Blight League. Speaking of Blight League, let's compare Metamorph to Blight League in their Ascendancy popularity. In terms of popularity, of course, Necromancer and Assassin and Sabo were all towards the top in Blight League. For those of you wondering, oh, but Iron, when was it exactly that you took the stats for Blight League? It was at the start of week 3 for Blight League, and right now we're just at the tail end of the first week of Metamorph League. So there's still some room for the league to change and for players to make different decisions as currency begins to accrue over the next couple of weeks. But this gives us really a point of reference for us to see exactly how Metamorph League is shaped and how decisions are made based on players' starters and what we all originally thought would be strong as we picked various starters for the various leagues that we were playing. And then it'll give us a story and a narrative over the next couple of weeks of what really changes as we all discover more about the Atlas of Conquerors expansion as well as the Metamorph League mechanic. One of the great things that I enjoy about these types of comparisons are they really give us an overview of what that rotationary meta looks like and whether or not players still think something is strong. But because there were no major Ascendancy changes between Metamorph and Blight League, for the most part, it would make sense if a lot of these Ascendancies stayed relatively close to their positions earlier. Berserker, for instance, is right now in Metamorph League, whether it's softcore or hardcore, dead last in Ascendancy popularity. Inquisitor in softcore is still relatively close to the bottom. Ascendant is still relatively close to the bottom. Chieftain, still relatively close to the bottom. And again, these are just relative comparisons, right? They're not perfect numbers to say these are always going to be this way. Maybe someone discovers something or makes a build over the next couple of weeks, and we all discover something new and fresh and exciting about one of these Ascendancies that's otherwise not as popular. One of the biggest takeaways, though, from Metamorph, which, of course, did receive some bow reworks, is that Deadeye and Pathfinder and Raider really are in pretty similar spots to where they were at previously, because, of course, none of them received massive reworks, and the changes so far that have been made to bows and bow skills haven't necessarily spiked their popularity. It could be that in a few weeks we'll look back and we'll see, as people accrue currency, that does change. So if Metamorph versus Blight isn't the greatest comparison for Ascendancy popularity, what if we zoomed the picture out even further and we just did a 2019 meta comparison? Well, a reminder for those of you maybe who are new during Metamorph League or over the last year, Synthesis, we had an occultist-dominated league in both softcore and hardcore, along with Trickster coming in at the second to top spot, and Elementalist coming in at the third top spot in softcore, and Inquisitor coming in at the third top spot in hardcore. Inquisitor now, by the way, is down towards one of the lowest spots that it has been over the last year. So it's interesting to see, again, how that rotation and how nerfs and how buffs to various Ascendancies change the way how we all play things. Of course, Occultist got a massive nerf and a massive change. Wicked Ward is now available on the passive tree in general, so you no longer have to play Occultist in order to get that particular keystone. And in Legion, we saw a massive domination of the meta by the Slayer at 42%, Trickster at 13%, and then Deadeye at 11% in softcore. In hardcore, we still saw Slayer, Trickster, but then Juggernaut coming in the third spot. For Blight, which was, of course, the most recent league previously, we saw Necro at 43%, Assassin at 10%, and Saboteur at 9%. In Hardcore, we saw even more a balance, as it were, between the rest of the lower classes, but for the most part, people were still playing Necro, Assassin, and Sabo. Now, one of the fascinating aspects of this is with no massive nerfs or changes to Ascendancies, you can see that the numbers for Necromancer are probably going to remain pretty steady. One of the interesting aspects of this is that Sabo has grown just as much as it has. Now this, I would say, is probably one of those data points that is most affected by the timeline that we are, of course, having this discussion 1 week into a league versus 3 weeks into a league. A lot of players will league start with a Saboteur because they're incredibly cheap to get off the ground and easy to take down a whole lot of bosses. And then as, again, players accrue currency and are farming different styles of content and develop familiarity with the new Atlas and with the Metamorph League itself and the Metamorph mechanic farming in Tane's laboratory, we might see people shift away from the Sabo onto more niche Ascendancies. But this gives us a 2019 meta overview to see how things are changing. And it really makes me say that this particular league right now, Metamorph, this is actually the most balanced Ascendancies that we have seen, at least in 2019. We can certainly say that. This is the most even distribution of popularity that we have seen. The next closest would have been Synthesis, but Legion and Blight were heavily dominated by either Slayers or by Necros. And while you might say in hardcore, Necromancer is dominating pretty much still continually, hopefully that number won't rise. Hopefully, again, as people acquire currency and spread out and find more hardcore viable builds, maybe that'll pull back a little bit. But for those of you who have been looking for some true balance to the game, this might actually be, in terms of popularity of Ascendancy choices, the most balanced that we have been in all of 2019. In terms of deep delvers, the best builds right now in softcore are going to, of course, still be raiders. A lot of players are going with those deep delving raider builds, but you can still see a healthy distribution among the top players who are making it deep down. The deepest delvers at the time of this particular discussion's recording was 750, but you'll notice the big difference between softcore and hardcore. Not a whole lot of hardcore players are pushing the delve ladder at the moment, and so, for instance, the deepest players in hardcore delve wouldn't even make it into the top charts for softcore, because right here on softcore we've got 300 depth plus, whereas on hardcore the deepest players total have only made it to like 240, 250, 200 itself. So there is a wide variance in terms of delve depth, which of course that's always going to be the case in between softcore and hardcore. But I think in hardcore we will see that escalate a lot harder as players accrue currency and are able to dump that currency into characters that are then going to go rip inside Delve. Moving on to popular skills, you can take a look and see that, of course, Arc is back on the menu, boys. So this was something that as soon as patch notes hit, we all heard, and really as soon as the develop manifesto hit and there was one sentence that included that Arc was getting buffed, we all just went nuts and overreacted. And as a league right now, we're actually kind of not overreacting. It's amazing to see, again, the skill distribution, that only 10% of players are playing Arc in softcore, and in hardcore only 8% are playing Arc. Now, you might say that, well, that's still a top tier or a top popularity in terms of skill choice, that's still on the top end. And yes, it still is on the top end, but this isn't nearly what it's been in the past, whether it's been 30% of players are playing Vortex or Cold Snap or Cyclone or Essence Drain Contagion, or even zombies, right? This is relatively balanced. In softcore and in hardcore, we see a healthy mix between Arc, Spectres, Skeletons, Zombies, and Cyclone, along with a sprinkle in of maybe Essence Drain and Explosive Arrow, some Toxic Rain here and there. But you actually see some diversity across the board. I think this is actually a really good thing for all of us veteran players who have been playing Path of Exile for, let's say, more than 2019, who have been saying, could we get some more balance updates? Could we look for some more aspects that we can really even the playing field between different build styles? And right now, at least at the start of Metamorph, it's either one of two things, at least in my opinion. It's either players are just trying to familiarize themselves with the content, which of course we all are, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we wouldn't go back to our comfort zones of ascendancies and skills that we would have in the past. So the fact that we're not just a massively dominated skill and ascendancy league that looks very similar to Blight, the fact that we've actually got a little bit more diversity spread across the board in terms of ascendancies and skills, again, to me shows a healthy amount of balance in between all builds in Metamorph. Then again, this is only week one. Maybe it's a gross overstatement, and over the next couple of weeks, somebody's going to make some silly build that absolutely abuses the Metamorph mechanic and absolutely trivializes the Awakener and all of his various associated bosses, and then all of a sudden 40% of the league is going to be playing that. Who knows? So I guess we'll just have to say stay tuned and keep playing Metamorph to see. Next up, we've got popular items. Of course, Tabula Rasa is going to be featured as everybody is leveling up and nobody really has their true end game 6 links yet. And so Tabula Rasa is, of course, a budget way to start your league. But also making appearances are at Ziri's Promise in softcore, along with On's Heritage in hardcore. And then, of course, Essence Worm is a great unique in both leagues, simply because of the additional quality of life that it brings. Regardless of your build, you can probably use the ability to have extra gem levels on a socketed gem, whether it's a particular aura or whether it's a particular utility skill that you are using. You probably want some extra quality of life levels onto it. And of course, if it doesn't reserve any mana, well, that's a massive benefit for a lot of players as well. Moving on to the passive trees. Okay, I just have to say this. It's like 36% and 39% of the softcore league is playing acro and phase acro. So if you look at these passive heat maps right here, you can just read the story for yourself, as it were. If you're playing hardcore, you're probably playing a life build, and you're probably mostly on the left side of the tree. If you're playing softcore, you're probably playing, I don't know, something that really doesn't care that much about life and defenses, at least certainly as much as someone playing hardcore, and you're probably on the top half side of the tree. Couple of things that this tells me. First off, it tells me a whole lot of people are neglecting, of course, Champion, which I still think Physical Impale Champion is great, but I think a lot of people were scared off with the fact that monsters now have a new defensive layer to help protect them against Impale. And of course, there's still some new passives that are going to relate to that and help players, those that are near the duelist node. But I think a lot of players are right now really scared to play various aspects of Magic Find characters, whether that's Tornado Shot, whether that's a Pathfinder or a Deadeye or a Radar or a Raider. I think people just don't have the currency right now to be dumping into that lower right-hand side of the tree, and people are scared of the Impale nerf and the various buffs to monster damage. That being said, in Metamorph League, it is a boss-killing league. There is a whole bunch of additional resistances, a whole bunch of additional armor, and a whole bunch of additional life onto bosses, which means anybody that wants to play a Slayer and have bonus Culling Strike, essentially enhanced Culling Strike, that is going to be a very, very strong utility later on in the league. It's going to be something for players who maybe wouldn't have the DPS to go over that additional mark in order to min-max their particular builds. Culling Strike may actually be able to take some players at this point in time, depending on how bosses shape up, from getting a boss kill with maybe like a portal or two left in softcore versus not being able to get that boss kill whatsoever. So we'll see what that looks like and how that shapes up. But I think Culling Strike support on a weapon swap or on a gem swap is actually going to be a thing, because bosses have so much HP in this league. And even if you want to make the argument, well, let's say that you can do 100 million DPS, in theory, right? 100 million DPS. What's a 20% cull anyway? Who cares about a 20% cull? Well, that means every 5 bosses, you essentially get an extra boss worth of time because you didn't have to take that time to kill that boss. So even if you want to argue once you've got that DPS, the Culling Strike isn't necessary, it's still quality of life for a lot of players that want to get to the top end and continually farm endgame challenges and maybe endgame bosses as quickly as possible and get those turned around. So I think we might actually see some increase in Slayer. And of course, Legion is back on Zana's menu, which means a lot of people, as they get currency, are going to be looking for Inspired Learnings, are going to be looking for Headhunters, and are going to be running a whole bunch of 4- and 5-way timeless domain conflicts, which means, yeah, Slayer and Cyclone at some point throughout the league is going to see a resurgence. Well, thanks so much for watching. I wanted to ask you all, what Ascendancy choices have you made thus far in 3.9 Metamorph League? Also wanted to ask, what has been your primary DPS or 5-link setup? Then lastly, I wanted to hear from you all, what uniques have been the best in slot so far for your build? Are you using a Tabula Rasa? Does your build not need a Tabula Rasa? And maybe it's an off-meta unique that you have found for yourself. For me, I am of course league starting with Essence Drain Contagion, and so Cane of Unraveling for literally 1 alch is what I picked it up for, has been a godsend for my build and has helped me through so much content, and I'm still using it simply because there's so much quality of life on that particular staff. So that for me has probably been the best in slot, other than the Gold Rim that dropped for me in like Act 4. Which I'm still using in maps. But anyway, enough about terrible uniques that I'm using. I want to hear about your uniques that you're using. So drop us a comment down below, and I hope that today is the day a Mirror of Calandra drops for you in 3.9 Metamorph League. Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.